to the Mind Over Masculinity, where we explore mental health, vulnerability, and the power of emotional truth for men. I'm your host, Sana, and today's guest is someone who is transforming the landscape of community engagement through the lens of neurodiversity and mental health. Listeners, meet Thomas R. Wilson. Let me share a bit about Thomas with all of you. He is a writer, business owner, sensory friendly event specialist, and community advocate whose work has received international acclaim and even government recognition. He's partnered with 40 businesses to design inclusive, welcoming spaces for underserved communities. And his voice has become an anchor in both the neurodiverse and the broader mental health worlds. Well, today we'll be diving into something very personal. We'll be diving into Thomas's personal journey, the mental health challenges men face, and how bias impacts neurodiverse individuals, and what true inclusion looks like. So, let's quickly get into this beautiful conversation. So, Thomas, welcome to the show, and I am absolutely honored to have you with us.
Thank you for having me on. I'm sure it's gonna be a great conversation today.
Yes, absolutely. And I would love to tell my listeners that I had personally hosted Thomas on one of my show. We talked about sensory friendly events, and it was such a such an informative, great experience to be aware, to know that and to see inclusion actually getting practiced in a meaningful way on the ground. So with that, Thomas, let's talk about your journey because it is so layered, from advocacy to event design to personal lived experience. So can you take us back to the beginning? I mean, what first opened your eyes to the need for change and how we support men's mental health?
Definitely. I'm gonna preface, journey might seem unique to some, it might seem similar to others. One of the things that I've learned in this world is, um, everybody everybody has a story to tell. But so often we feel so alone that we don't always realize how much our stories can resonate with others. And so my story, specifically in men's mental health, actually starts with several key men in my life. Um, I like to practice what I call intentional storytelling, and in that, I'm going to intentionally leave out details on other people's lives for respect for them. But I knew, like, in my life, I've known many great men. I've also known many flawed men, myself included. And one of the things I learned is there is this idea that a great man can have a really bad day and can be viewed as a bad man. And so my experience, especially with the key figures, my father, several other men in my family, was drastically different, but it was always shaped by that idea of redemption as well as the idea of perseverance. And so at a young age, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and ADHD. I always say that the diagnostic journey in the United States is a super complex, difficult journey. There's a lot of people in the world nowadays who refuse to get diagnosed just because it can be so complex. But in my journey, I was told even at a young age that, I was going to be a prodigy and I was going to be a success before my diagnosis. And shortly after, I also noticed that idea was changing in a lot of people's minds. I was a young kiddo dealing with the difficulty of trying to communicate my needs when I was upset, with very few people teaching me how to do that. Um, I grew up around a lot of hostility in men, and was taught that that was normal, was taught that that was the outlet for men. I was also taught at a young age going through all these things that men were expected to be viewed as the leaders, but they were also not supposed to be questioned and they were supposed to control the house. And at a really young age, I learned there's some really bad dangers in that. I learned from my teachers that hostility was the norm and that I shouldn't communicate what I was saying. From my male teachers, I was viewed as angry, but I could also see the anger in my teachers towards my own diagnosis. I saw in several key family members people who were deeply angry, but couldn't or didn't want to show a lot of other emotions. And so that was a really intense kind of lesson at a young age because it wasn't so much a focus on the idea of preserving the positive emotions or even understanding how to process what some might view as negative emotions. And so my experience as a young man coming up into the world in middle school and high school was my response was often anger. It was frustration. It was when I wanted to say something desperately, I would yell it, or if I was upset, I would tear up paper. And I preface that because tearing up paper for me was this beautiful way of expressing my emotions in the least destructive way possible. But when supports, when people saw that, they viewed it as simply destructive and told me to stop. And it created a really strong conflict in me because I was trying to communicate something. I was told I was being disruptive. I wanted to have an outlet that I viewed as helpful, but I wasn't really taught how to do other outlets. I wasn't taught how to communicate. And I think that's a really important concept for men is the idea of effective communication, especially in a world that does often want to silence us. I will say none of us are perfect, but we have to learn how to do these skills at a young age, or at least learn how to adapt them as we get older. And so in my school, that was a lot of my process. I'm not going to say I was a saint. I was struggling a lot. I was very going through a lot of different emotions, a lot of different pains. I felt very alone. But I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to help people like me. And so as I got older, I started finding my passion in my advocacy, standing up for my students, telling my story, working on writing and poetry. And I'm going to emphasize really quickly here I am not by any means what I think a lot of people would describe as traditionally masculine. I am a guy who, if I really need to cry, I cry. I am very open with my emotions now. I am very honest with people in my affection. I'm very gentle. I'm very sensitive. And I love the fact that our culture, and I started noticing this as I got older in college in my older years, our culture really craves that. And the idea of traditional masculinity, I feel like a lot of the time is being forgotten because it's been destructive. And so as I got older and I started challenging those emotions, those lessons, I ended up in the school system working for kiddos who couldn't read, becoming one of their well, not couldn't read, but couldn't read on their level that they were supposed to, becoming one of their favorite teachers. I then ended up in a day program that healthcare, thriving as a mentor and an advocate who can help people access their emotions after getting several trainings in psychology and state level work. Several of my work has been mentioned, but I also opened up my business in 2021 after a really long depressive point. And I think this is something else that I faced was even though I was on a good path, I stopped taking care of my mental health as much as I should. And that became a snowballing effect and eventually became me having to reset my life again. Luckily, the people that I had that truly supported me, but a lot of people turned their back on me at that point, which is unfortunate. It happens to a lot of men. We go through great times of struggle and people will leave. But I'm also going to say I was not perfect in this time. But in this moment of this great reset, I wanted to find something that would help me connect to who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And I opened up my business, RNH Creative Advocacy. And the best part about it is I get to take all those experiences. I get to be my true self, my gentle, kind, loving, compassionate self, someone a lot of key men I had in my life growing up would not accept as traditionally masculine or masculine in my own way. And I get to shape and transform it into this loving, kind of centered, comfortable, protective, and beautiful sense of storytelling and community that is kind of sending shockwaves to a lot of community on how we can care for people, how we can understand a person's need, how we can protect people without controlling them, but also helping people find their voice and identify who they want to be. And it's been a whirlwind, but it's been an incredible transformation period.
Mm. What a journey. Thanks. I mean, uh, yeah, I mean, you are right. There will be people who will be with us, um, and there will be people who will turn your back on. But uh, more than that, it's a journey where we explore ourselves and try to make the best of what we have with us. And of course, you definitely you are creating this platform for others to voice themselves, to have their own identity, self identity, especially among men, which is really, really, really the need of the hour right now. Um, okay, and let's talk about your work, Thomas. It's at the intersection of mental health and neurodiversity, something, a space which is often misunderstood. Um, so, what kind of biggest misconceptions you have observed, people having about these two communities?
So I think that there's a lot of things, but when it comes to the biggest, especially due to the topic, I think a lot of it is one of the big ones is the idea that if people don't fit into the mold of what we expect them to be, like the idea of either as students in school not matching to exactly what the students want, or in our communities men being expressing themselves differently due to their neurodiversity, or developing a strong sense of empathy or compassion, or even the idea of people kind of finding a creative avenue for work. I think the biggest thing there is the misconception that that person is not being productive, or that person is not following in the right path. And I can say that is, a very uh, you know, distinctly European kind of ancestry. I know there's a lot of communities out there that face a lot of scrutiny already, and there's a lot of protectiveness, and I can't speak on that. I can speak on a very Italian kind of Anglo-Saxon kind of American lifestyle. And it's easier to say that now, um, than it is, well, like, and obviously even within that community, there are a lot of sub communities, but I think it becomes a judgment. It becomes a frustration of, well, why isn't this person behaving the way I want them to? And I think that's partly because we have created a society uh, that is so kind of put someone in a box kind of thing. And if they're not filling that, like not doing that exact thing or being in that box, and they're being destructive or they're not being productive. The other thing I think that ties into that is there is such a disconnect, I feel like, with mental health and neurodiversity. There are communities out there where there is just this brutal kind of daily living, or there is just not a lot of resources available, or like I know I've talked to a lot of people in like rural Colorado or rural United States, and there's like 1,000 people in the town, and programs or resources or government aid is just hard to find, specifically when it comes to education and career or mental health care. And I think it's a lot harder than people think, even in a city, to access that because there's so much lack of awareness on how to access those things. And I bring this up in the preface to say when we don't have resources readily available to us, it makes it far harder to treat our mental health, our neurodiversity, especially like in rural areas where you have an hour drive to a Walmart or something to pick up prescriptions, or cities where you have cultural and environmental factors that are going to make it dangerous or even just confusing on how to break out of a mindset. That can be really hard. And then the third thing I really want to emphasize is the idea that our society very much has a status quo. And I think this is true of every country around the world. As much as we want to innovate, be progressive, change ideas, challenge the status quo, whatever you want to call it, there is a centuries, if not millennia long kind of attitude towards men. And I just preface men just because this is a masculinity talk. Um, and then you add on these newer kind of ideas of neurodiversity, which talk and conversations around that are rapidly happening. Then you have discussions on mental health, and you're trying to break the norm of, oh, it's okay to seek treatment, it's okay to do this. But then you also just have the societal pressures. The men can't always treat themselves, they have to be the ones to provide or to care. And it's almost seen as noble to sacrifice our mental health for the sake of family, which to a degree it is, but at a certain point that can be disruptive. And then the other thing is, we live in a world where, I'm sure this happens to women too, but like the numbers on how alone men feel in the world are really high, and trying to get someone to break out of loneliness is a really difficult topic. And then getting out of loneliness and then breaking out of the stereotypes around healthcare for men, that's really confounding and incredibly difficult.
True, true. That is true. And the numbers don't lie. I mean, statistically, if we see the suicide rates, at least in India, I can say lately there has been an insurgence and in number of people talking about men's mental health. Um, and of course, there are stereotypes attached here. I'm not outrightly, or we are not outrightly focusing only on men's mental health, but if we are creating a platform here to have conversations on this, share our messages, share our voice, share our opinions, then I think that will be more than a good reason to address on men's mental health and the stigma attached to it, the stereotypes attached there. Um, so thank you so much for highlighting this, Thomas, in such a beautiful way. And also, when it comes to creating inclusive spaces for men, what kind of pushbacks do you get, and how do you navigate them? Because it definitely requires a great deal of patience, understanding, groundedness, clarity, conviction. How do you do that?
So the first thing I try to do is be gentle and be patient. I work with multiple generations, multiple age ranges, and I think there is. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There's still a lot of bias and judgment in healthcare here in the United States towards men entering into the field. It's not as seen as much, and it's not as talked about as much. And to say there's bias to our healthcare in general. But when I try to create a inclusive space, one of the things that I try to touch on is just creating a space where ideas can be shared. And I myself, I work with a lot of young men and I hear a lot of comments, a lot of things that I would normally challenge or a lot of, like 17 to like 24-year-olds are going to make observations that I disagree with about women or like femininity. But the point in those moments is not necessarily for me to challenge that unless hurting the conversation or hurting the vibe with the people in the room. Sometimes, men need this from time to time just as much as women do, and women vice versa. We just need people to validate what we say from time to time, not to challenge it, not to put pressure on us to correct all the time. Um, and then, like, the other aspects of it are how many people understand that they can share their thoughts, that they can have ideas and to process them well, they can engage safely. And, I think there's a lot of judgment that can happen to men. Obviously, it can happen to women too, of like big men, we sometimes, viewed as scary. And that happens. And it's valid. Sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not. Create space for people to express themselves creatively is a great way to do that. I myself am a big dude. Once people know, they see me smile, they see me laugh, they see me have fun, that intimidation factor tends to go away in people's minds. And so we've got to do the same for people in the space. We got to allow them to express themselves, be creative, understand their ideas. And I'm going to try to be quick because I know we don't have a ton of time left. But the other thing that I really want to emphasize is honoring questions and honoring emotions. I think a lot of times people don't expect men to show up to an event space and be anxious or nervous or have a hard time processing information. Or if we get frustrated, people might go, oh, this person's going to be hostile or all of these things. And there are so many different components and factors in neurodiversity and mental health care
Mm.
that will make things for a man hard to understand. And same thing with women. Absolutely. And so in this, we got to create opportunities for back and forth conversation and for people to know that they have someone to rely on if they have questions. Um, I think a lot of us have probably heard the stereotype of, men are expected to have the answers in the workplace at an event or be the leaders. And sometimes giving them the opportunity to step back and be in a comfortable creative space and rely on someone else is a very powerful motive.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you, Thomas. Oh, wow. Okay. So for the men who are listening today to us, who feel alone or they are not sure where they fit in, or do they even need that template to fit in, what would you say to them right now, Thomas?
So I would say, and it's so hard because everyone is so different, so unique. And I'm actually going to start there. I'm going to emphasize to all the men listening who feel alone or stranded or all that. I want to tell you really quickly, you are important. You matter. You are special. That is a line I got from The Help, the movie, and it's one of my all-time favorite quotes. And the reason I say that is so often men do not get compliments like that. And so I want to let you know your emotions matter. Your feelings hurt. I just encourage you not to go into the darkness of that, not to bury those feelings down, not to yell or scream or feel like you have to do it all alone. One of the things I love about femininity is a gentleness or an ability to express or a creativity. And I know that's so different than what so many of us are told to be. But find your passion, find something you can do on the day to day, find something that you laugh at, makes you feel special, makes you feel relaxed for a moment, and then try to find those people. It can take time, it can be so hard, it can hurt to do so, but we gotta start moving forward. Gotta find the people who are gonna listen, who are gonna make us feel special, who are gonna make us feel honored. And then the last thing I really want to say there is seek treatment. If you're truly depressed, truly anxious, truly worried, truly scared, truly upset, I promise you somewhere there is treatment out there. There are ways to help yourself because one of the best things men can do to challenge the stereotypes and the biases and the hatred that we get sometimes is to do the opposite of what people expect of us, to challenge the norm, to work harder, to be better, and to put in the work.
That is such a beautiful and powerful message, Thomas. Beautifully put. Lovely, lovely. So, if our listeners would like to connect with you, Thomas, what's the best way to do that?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, be Thomas R. Wilson. You'll see R&H Creative Advocacy tied to that. You can also email me at ndttrpg@gmail.com. I realize so many of those letters sound so identical, so I'll make sure all of this is in the comment section. You can also reach out to my website, which is rhcreativeadvocacy and storytelling.net. And I'll make sure my link tree and a few other things are provided. I don't know about anyone else listening, but after, a half an hour conversation, sometimes I don't have the ability to retain links. But I'll make sure all of those are passed along.
Lovely, lovely. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And Thomas, thank you for sharing your journey. Beautiful yet powerful insights. And of course, I hugely appreciate your fierce commitment to inclusion. And definitely, healing, although is a personal journey, but overall, it's definitely a collective journey as well. And with your work, I think this proves more and more. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
And to all the listeners, whether you identify yourself as neurodiverse or you are exploring your emotional health or you simply want to be a part of better future for men, this is your invitation. This is your calling. So stay connected, stay curious, and most importantly, stay human. And until next time on Mind Over Masculinity, this is your host Sana. Be well, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you.